Hey fellas, welcome back to the channel.
The Lion Knights. Nothing is more timeless than seeing their signature emblem imprinted in the chests of several men, showing the eternal lion standing in its hind legs. But perhaps even in their wake, a symbol has accompanied the mighty lion through a lot. From the battlefields to times of peace and bounty, the symbol of the crossed axes has always been associated with the Crusaders, and for many years, it's flown quite under the radar for a lot of people. But even years later, the symbol still continues accompanying the lions wherever they go, even appearing in 2022's Lion Knight's castle. And so, a question remains in my head. What are these axes representing? Why do they exist? Are these truly Lion Knights or Crusaders at all? Well, I have a theory, so buckle up and let's get to the bottom of this. First, before we can even talk about that, we need to go through a small recap on who the Lion Knights are in the first place. Many much more versed people have made very in-depth videos on the matter. I recommend breaking up Brad's Tavern talk on the Lion Knights. However, even then, I'll give a small recap for those who are out of the loop. The Lion Knights are a faction from the Lego Castle theme, first released in 1984, being almost 40 years old by now. Feel old yet? They were first introduced in sets such as Knight's Arsenal, which I happen to have right here. These fellows have always served as the de facto good guys of the golden age of Castle, or as much of a set of good guys these mini warcrime machines are capable of being, and have founded a long and absolutely not overdone tradition of having lions in every single shield and banner the LEGO group could think of. The lions have faced different factions throughout the years, such as the Black Falcons, Black Knights, Forestmen, and even the Wolfpack Marauders. With the release of the initial Castle factions in 1984, something interesting could be appreciated. The Crusaders, as they were called back in the day, seem to have variations of their torso prints. One of them, only understood as part of the same faction by their peaceful presence in several sets. In set 6080, King's Castle for example, you can see that some of the guards bared the crossed axes insignia. Meanwhile, others bared the lion's insignia instead. Who were these folk, and what were they hiding behind those blank, smiley faces of theirs? Well, spit it out then. Are they another faction, subdued under the banner of the lion? Are they just randomly decided symbols that the LEGO group just found nice? Maybe. We'll never know for certain. But my theory is that these people are distinct, and that this symbol is used more on purpose than you think. I believe that these not-so-fine folk are Sir Richard's standing army. Yes, that's the name of the Lion Knights leader from 1984. Now, you may be wondering how this random tiefling in the internet got to such a silly conclusion. Levies? Really, Ghiojo? What makes you think that these fine folk are levies? I mean, look at them. They don't look that different from the Lion Knights. What about the archers wearing the lion symbol? Well, there are differences, actually. In 6080, we can see that there's a clear distinction in what kind of gear each Crusader wears, and therefore what kind of soldier they would represent. The ones wearing the lion's crest are archers, wearing the typical skull cap. Side tangent, yes, that's the name of this style of helmet. It's a skull cap with mail underneath. Here are some reference images. It's basically a metal cap with leather straps you put over your mail, so that you don't get your head terraformed by a particularly heavy mace. Nevertheless, where were we? Right, minifigures in the King's Castle. The ones wearing the breastplates are knights, or on the very least well-equipped men at arms, wielding lances and heavy armor and riding horses. But then if we turn our attention to the equipment that the crossed axes have, however, something interesting can be seen. First, they're the only ones wearing nasal helms, with very simple weaponry accompanying it, usually wielding either axes or spears. These choice of weapons are very interesting because spears have been predominant throughout the medieval period, not only because they're effective and relatively cheap, but also they're incredibly easy to use. You just grab a long pole with a metal tip and just poke at the enemy. If you have to fend off another person, you just need to keep harassing them with the tip. I think this is something of note, because the equipment that they wield is simpler weapons and armor than their counterparts, being the lions and the breastplates. And additionally, none of the promotional images we see do we see them even close to a horse, something that the archers seem to have the luxury to handle. Now, stable hands were always a thing, lowly peasants who handled horses of nobles and groomed them, but it's important to understand that when we find these crossed-axe folks, we never see them mounted. They're always in a position of some form of guard duty. In King's Castle, they guard the entrance and the walls. But then why are the archers in 6080 wearing the knight's insignia then? Simple. The answer, in my opinion, lies in the excerpt that we've gotten from the set 10305 Lion Knight's Castle. To quote it,
"Few great houses command as much respect as the Knights of the Lion. Renowned for their courage, they serve the lady with great honor. Their bravery and their mastery over the longbow ensure that the lady's rule remains unchallenged."
A quick thanks to Lasagna over at the Lego Castle Discord for a quick snippet so I didn't have to go dig through my own boxes to find it myself. This excerpt does show something interesting. It speaks of specifically the Knights of the Lion, not the general army, but the knights had a mastery over the longbow. It wouldn't be out of the question then that, as odd as it would seem, nobles of this land fought both as cavalry and archers. The term knight specifically applies to those who were knighted by a king, usually being given a piece of land to own and rule over for their years of service. These men are not common folk. This does go further than 6080, however. Set 6022 is a supply cart fiercely manned by two soldiers, both of which bear the Crusader crossed axes insignia. One of them is an archer, which could imply that there were still levies or a general army of bowmen, just that some nobles led them. This is surprisingly accurate with the theory, as you wouldn't put a high-ranking knight protecting a supply line. In Blacksmith Shop, we see yet another soldier, which is performing typical guard duty. Again, more of a levy or low-ranking soldier's job. In 6061, the people storming the walls are the lowly and more abundant and expendable crossed axes. Levies were usually the bulk of an army, and storming a wall, especially the first wave after breaching with something like a siege tower, you usually sent the levies to soften them up before sending the folks that you don't want dead. In set 6060, we can see that in the promotional images, the two people sitting next to the lady are two fine gentlemen who had totally not had too much to drink, both of which are wearing quite fine clothing, one of which is a lion's crest and the other a breastplate, which was a particularly expensive piece of equipment in the medieval era. So we're probably well off. And who sits outside the lady's tent, just standing guard? The crossed axes. There's one more set I'd like to talk about before this video ends, however, and that's the set named Treasure Card, who has a knight carrying a chest of fat stacks of loot. This fine fellow is wearing a lion's crest. You'd think a set like this would disprove the deliberate factor of the use of the crossed axes, and would imply that LEGO just rolled dice to see which insignias appeared in which sets, but I believe this still emboldens the fact that the crossed axes were levies or irregulars. After all, let's say that you just got out from storming a castle and plundering all its belongings. Who would you trust with carrying the loot back home? Your trusted knights / men-at-arms from your standing army who pledge fealty to you and works for you? Or little Timmy that you just levied out of his village a month ago, who's probably equipped with his father's hunting spear and an ill-fitting skullcap that he got from a dead soldier last battle, and who probably lost his insignia twice by now. There are more sets that display this kind of trend as well. The Guarded Inn is guarded by crossed axes that act as town guards. The Lady's Card is also guarded by a town guard, and the King's Mountain Fortress, which displays more of the traits of a private fortress rather than a castle you'd put near a city, is not guarded by these folk, but rather soldiers who look much more different than the rest of the army, almost as if they were a private military from the king's personal guard. And even to this day, the lions still seem to follow the trend. If we look at 2022's Lion Knight's Castle, the only sign of the crossed axes is found in a heraldic shield, neatly sitting in the armory halls of what we can clearly see as a private homestead, where Lady Leone, probably a successor of King Richard, lives her life happily, surrounded by her most loyal knights. This does mean that technically, if this theory is correct, the knights included in the castle are all knights, and that actually amassing an army of them is kind of pointless because they're supposed to be a sort of elite force. It'd be a damn foolish move to then just buy a lot of them on... Oh. Right. At the end of the day, however, each person has the agency over their own plastic toys. I'm simply a guy on the internet theorizing on the nature of the heraldry of plastic minifigures based on the context from promotional images. If you believe that the crossed axes should be a set of elite forces, or maybe even another faction altogether, go ahead, go wild. LEGO has always been a toy focused solely on encouraging being creative, making your own stories, building what you want. Don't let me or anyone else tell you otherwise. But as for what the official word from LEGO is, unless I can somehow get in contact with the old LEGO designers who might have had more of an idea about all this, all I can say is, hey, it's just a theory, Again! Oh no, wrong script. Well fellas, I hope you enjoyed the small video essay. If you liked it, consider leaving a like. And if you like this kind of content, whether it's about Lego, fantasy, or a little bit of gaming content sprinkled in here and there, consider subscribing and checking out my other videos. Without further ado, I'll see you all next time.